Welcome back to the Political Pulse, your trusted source for navigating the whirlwind of U.S. politics with a dash of humor and a sprinkle of sanity. I'm Andrew Carter.
And I'm Rachel Bennett. Each week, we sift through the chaos to bring you the stories that matter and the ones that make you wonder if we're all living in a political sitcom.
Wow, you guys sent in like a mountain of news this week. It's, well, pretty intense stuff, but hey, that's what we're here for. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we try to make sense of it all.
That we do.
This week, we're going to try to unpack the most important stuff, connect some dots that you might not have seen, and hopefully point out a few things that'll leave you saying, huh, didn't see that coming. We've got everything from like national security blunders to some really wild moves in politics and economics.
It's a lot to process, from, classified military intel ending up in the wrong place to foreign cars suddenly getting a whole lot pricier, Elon Musk throwing his weight around in local politics, and even chatter about a third presidential term. It's a lot. And what's really interesting is how these seemingly unrelated stories might actually be connected in some pretty unexpected ways.
Right. It's like, where do you even begin?
Well, maybe we should start with that whole SignalGate thing. It sounds like something out of a spy thriller, but it's actually happening right now. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz accidentally added Jeffrey Goldberg, who's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, to a Signal group chat.
Oops.
Yeah, oops is right. But this wasn't just a casual chat about the weather or, weekend plans. They were talking about some seriously sensitive stuff. Classified military operations. Specifically, potential airstrikes in Yemen. Think about it. Discussions about life and death situations, military strategy, happening in a chat app, even one that's encrypted, that was never meant for this level of secrecy. Makes you wonder, doesn't it, about how secure these channels really are and how easily sensitive information can slip through the cracks.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think about how we handle this kind of information in a world where everyone's constantly connected.
Right, and it's not like these were low-level officials either. We're talking about Vice President J.D. Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and from what we've gathered, they were discussing these attack plans, like, really casually, talking about weapon types, timing, almost like they were planning a picnic.
Which, I don't know, seems a little too relaxed for a conversation about dropping bombs.
Exactly. It raises some serious questions about, the awareness of the gravity of this kind of information, even at the highest levels. Are the right protocols always being followed? Is there a sense of, complacency maybe when it comes to handling classified data in these informal settings?
And then there's Hegseth's response when this all came out. He basically called Goldberg a liar, said he was deceitful and highly discredited. But the irony is the information Goldberg reported on seems to have come, well, accidentally, from Hegseth's own chat group.
It's almost textbook deflection, right? Attack the messenger instead of addressing the actual issue. But it doesn't change the fact that this information got out, and that it raises some really disturbing questions about how secure our national security really is.
Unsurprisingly, this has sparked some serious concern in Washington. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is calling for a full-blown congressional investigation, calling the whole thing reckless, irresponsible, and dangerous.
And he's got a point. Leaking classified military info, even by accident, can have huge consequences. It could put ongoing operations at risk, endanger the lives of people on the ground, and even damage relationships with our allies who depend on us to keep this kind of information under wraps.
A congressional investigation then could really help us understand the extent of the damage and, figure out how to prevent this kind of thing from happening again.
Exactly. And to add to the drama, a federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to preserve all messages related to this, from a specific time frame in March.
So this isn't going away anytime soon.
Nope. And things are getting serious when Saturday Night Live gets involved. Their latest cold open was a parody of the whole SignalGate mess, and apparently it wasn't even that far from the truth.
Yeah, I saw that. It was hilarious, but also kind of scary how real it felt.
It's a classic example of how satire can hold up a mirror to reality. It might be exaggerated for comedic effect, but the underlying message is a serious one. In this case, it's highlighting the absurdity and the danger of handling sensitive information so carelessly.
So the big takeaway here for everyone listening isn't just that, oops, some classified info ended up in the wrong chat group. It's about what this reveals about how human error can impact national security, even in this digital age where everything's supposed to be super secure. And it makes you wonder if our current systems and training are really up to the task.
Right. We need to be having a serious conversation about how we balance the convenience of these technologies with the absolute necessity of protecting sensitive information, because the stakes are incredibly high.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk economics. President Trump just dropped a bombshell announcement, a 25% tariff on all foreign car imports, and it goes into effect next week. So, if you've been thinking about importing that fancy European sports car, you might want to rethink your budget.
This is a classic example of protectionist trade policy. The administration's argument is that this will protect American jobs and boost domestic car manufacturing. The idea is to make those foreign cars so expensive that people will opt for American-made vehicles instead. It's a pretty bold move, and it's definitely going to have some major ripple effects.
Right. It's like a Buy American campaign, but for cars.
Right.
But not everyone's thrilled about this. Critics are pointing out the obvious, like how this is going to make cars more expensive for everyone. And then there's the risk of retaliation from other countries. What if they slap tariffs on American goods in response? It feels a bit like we're playing poker with the global economy, and the stakes are incredibly high.
Absolutely. The risk of a trade war is very real. If countries like Germany, Japan, or South Korea decide to fight back with tariffs of their own, it could hurt everyone involved. We could see prices go up on everything from electronics to agricultural products, and that could hurt consumers and businesses on both sides of the ocean.
And this is all happening at a time when the economy is already, well, let's say, a bit shaky. We've got inflation worries, concerns about a possible recession, and now we're throwing these tariffs into the mix. It feels a bit like, to quote one analyst, throwing gasoline on a dumpster fire.
It's certainly not the most comforting analogy, but it does capture the potential volatility of the situation. Tariffs essentially act as a tax on imported goods. Those costs are often passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. So in an economy already grappling with inflation, these tariffs could make things even worse. People might start cutting back on spending, and that could slow down economic growth even further.
So the message for you, the listener, is that this isn't just about car prices. It's about the bigger picture of how these trade policies can have a domino effect across the entire economy,
Right.
and how they can even impact your personal finances.
Right. It's a good reminder that economics and politics are deeply intertwined, and that decisions made in Washington can have very real consequences for your wallet.
Now for something completely different. Elon Musk, the Tesla and SpaceX guy, well, his political action committee is doing something pretty unusual. They're offering $100 to voters in Wisconsin, but there's a catch.
Yeah, they're offering this money to anyone who signs a petition opposing activist judges before the upcoming state Supreme Court election. Now, it's common to see political campaigns donating money and spending big on advertising, but directly paying people to sign a petition, that's a whole new level of political maneuvering.
Exactly. And as you can imagine, people are divided on this. Critics are calling it ethically dubious, saying it undermines democracy by essentially buying participation instead of encouraging people to engage based on their actual beliefs.
The concern is that people might sign this petition just for the money, without really understanding what it's about or what the implications are. That kind of undermines the whole point of a petition, right? It's supposed to be a genuine expression of public opinion.
But Musk's supporters see it differently. They're calling it a bold tactic to fight back against what they see as judges overstepping their boundaries. They argue that it's a way to empower citizens and make sure their voices are heard.
It definitely raises some interesting questions about the role of money in politics and what constitutes fair play. Where do we draw the line between legitimate campaigning and potentially manipulating the system?
But one thing's for sure, this move has thrust this Wisconsin Supreme Court race into the spotlight. It's almost become a referendum on Elon Musk himself and how much influence he should have in our political system. And it's set a precedent that other campaigns might try to follow.
And it highlights the growing influence of wealthy individuals in politics. They have the resources to make these kinds of moves, which raises concerns about fairness and whether everyone has an equal voice in our democracy. It's something we need to be paying close attention to.
Now let's talk about the Democrats. They seem to be having a bit of an identity crisis right now. There's this feeling of frustration, like they're not sure how to effectively counter President Trump and his agenda.
And it's interesting to see how figures like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez continue to draw huge crowds. They represent a more progressive, populist wing of the party, and their popularity suggests that a large part of the Democratic base is looking for bolder, more left-leaning policies.
Like you have all this energy and enthusiasm at the grassroots level, but it's not translating into a clear strategy at the national level. There's no unified message, no sense of what the party stands for, and that lack of direction Seems to be reflected in the declining approval ratings for congressional Democrats.
When a political party lacks a clear and consistent message, it can be really hard to connect with voters. If different factions within the party are all pushing different priorities, it creates confusion and makes it harder to present a united front against the opposition. And that's exactly what we're seeing with the Democrats right now.
And there's this internal debate going on about which direction to take. Should they embrace a more populist economic agenda to win back working-class voters, or should they stick to a more centrist approach? It's a tough choice, and it could have major consequences for the party's future.
This is a classic dilemma for political parties. How do you appeal to a broad range of voters while staying true to your core values? Do you compromise on some issues to win elections, or do you stick to your principles even if it means losing? These are tough questions, and the answers aren't always clear.
For our listeners, this look inside the Democratic Party is a reminder that politics is messy, that even the biggest and most established parties have their internal struggles. It's about understanding the challenges of trying to balance different viewpoints and develop a strategy that can actually win elections.
Right. It also shows how the political landscape is constantly shifting. Parties have to adapt to new realities, new challenges, and sometimes that means making tough choices. And it's fascinating to watch it all unfold.
Okay, let's check back in with the markets. Friday was a rough day on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted by 700 points, and the S&P 500 and NASDAQ also took a significant hit.
Stock market swings like this can be nerve-wracking, but they're often a reflection of broader economic anxieties. In this case, those tariffs that President Trump announced seem to be spooking investors. There's a lot of uncertainty about how this trade war might play out and what the impact will be on corporate profits and global growth.
It's like those tariffs we talked about earlier are already having a ripple effect. And it's not just the trade war that's causing concern. We're still dealing with stubborn inflation, and that's adding to the sense of unease. Investors are worried that rising prices will eventually force the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates, which could slow down the economy.
And when investors get nervous, they tend to sell off their stocks, which is what we saw happening on Friday. It's a classic case of fear driving market behavior.
And to make matters worse, consumer confidence has also taken a hit. It's now at its lowest level since 2022, which means that regular people, not just Wall Street types, are feeling less optimistic about the economy.
Consumer confidence is a key indicator because it reflects how people feel about their own financial situations and the overall state of the economy. When people are worried about the future, they tend to spend less, and that can have a real impact on economic growth. So this dip in consumer confidence is definitely something to keep an eye on.
But like with everything else, there are different ways to interpret this market downturn. Some investors might see this as a buying opportunity. They figure that stocks are now cheaper, so it's a good time to invest and hopefully make a profit when the market rebounds.
Exactly. Market fluctuations are a normal part of the economic cycle. What goes down must come up, right? But others might see this as a more ominous sign. They might be worried that this is the start of a bigger decline, maybe even a recession.
So for you, the listener, the takeaway here is that the markets are a complex beast, influenced by a whole range of factors, from global events to government policies to simple human emotions. And understanding how these factors interact can help you make sense of the ups and downs and maybe even make some informed decisions about your own investments.
It's all about staying informed, being aware of the risks, and not letting fear dictate your actions.
Now let's talk about something that's been happening all over the world. Protests against Tesla. We're not talking about a few disgruntled customers here. This was a coordinated global action, with protests taking place at over 500 Tesla locations.
And what's really interesting is that these protests weren't just about the cars themselves. Sure, some people might have complaints about quality or customer service, but the main driver seems to be something much bigger.
Yeah, it's about Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, and his close ties to the Trump administration. Protesters were accusing Musk of using his influence to push for policies that benefit his businesses, even if those policies hurt ordinary people.
They're pointing to things like Musk's role in advising the Trump administration on economic matters and his advocacy for cuts to government programs. Basically, they're saying that he's using his wealth and power to advance his own interests, even if it comes at the expense of the public good.
And these protests weren't all peaceful demonstrations either. There were reports of vandalism, clashes with police, and even some violence. It shows how strongly people feel about this issue.
It's a sign of the times, really. People are becoming more aware of how corporations and their leaders wield political power, and they're not afraid to hold them accountable. They're using their voices and their actions to demand that businesses act responsibly and ethically, not just chase profits.
But despite all this negative press, the protests, the reports of declining Tesla sales, Elon Musk seems unfazed. He's basically shrugged it off, saying that Tesla's doing just fine and that these protests are just a blip on the radar.
It's a classic example of a CEO projecting confidence, even in the face of adversity. Whether that confidence is justified remains to be seen, but it's clear that Musk is not backing down.
So the takeaway here is that corporations are no longer just economic entities. They're increasingly being seen as political players, and their actions are being scrutinized accordingly. And consumers are becoming more discerning, more willing to vote with their wallets and their feet, supporting businesses that align with their values and boycotting those that don't.
Right. It's about recognizing that our choices as consumers have power and that we can use that power to influence corporate behavior and hold businesses accountable for their actions.
Okay, last but not least, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. The possibility of a third term for President Trump. It's a topic that just keeps coming up. And he recently brought it up again at a rally, even comparing himself to FDR.
Now, it's crucial to remember that the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution clearly limits presidents to 2 terms. That was passed after FDR served 4 terms, largely because people were concerned about a single person holding that much power for too long.
Exactly. The 2-term limit is a cornerstone of American democracy, designed to prevent any one person from becoming too powerful and ensure a peaceful transfer of power. But then you have people floating these, well, creative interpretations of the Constitution, like this idea that Trump could temporarily resign, maybe let Vice President J.D. Vance take over for a bit and then come back and run again without technically violating the 2-term limit. It sounds like a legal loophole, if it even is one.
It's a very dubious legal theory, to say the least, and it would undoubtedly face immense legal challenges and scrutiny. The 22nd Amendment was specifically designed to prevent this kind of maneuvering. But the fact that it's even being discussed shows how far some people are willing to go to challenge the established norms of our democracy.
And even within the Republican Party, there's no consensus on this. Senate Majority Leader John Thune has dismissed the idea outright, saying that's not how this works. But then you have hardcore Trump supporters like Steve Bannon calling it a brilliant strategy, and Representative Matt Gaetz urging the party to explore all constitutional avenues.
It shows how divided the Republicans are on this issue. Some are clinging to the traditional rules and norms, while others seem willing to bend or even break those rules to keep Trump in power. It's a reflection of the deep polarization within the party and the country as a whole.
And Democrats are sounding the alarm, saying that this kind of talk is dangerous and undermines the very foundations of our democracy. California Governor Gavin Newsom even went so far as to say that this is how democracies crumble, pointing to the efforts by some Trump allies to restrict voting rights and expand executive power.
He's right to be concerned. The erosion of democratic norms doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process, a slow chipping away at the foundations of our system of government. And when you start questioning fundamental principles like term limits and the peaceful transfer of power, you're playing with fire.
So for all of you listening, the real question here isn't whether this third-term idea is legally feasible. It's about what it says about the state of our democracy and the willingness of some to push the boundaries, maybe even break the rules to achieve their political goals. And it raises a crucial question. Are we, as citizens, paying enough attention? Are we willing to defend the principles of our democracy, even when they're being challenged?
Right. This isn't just some abstract legal debate. It's about the future of our country and the kind of society we want to live in. It's about understanding our rights and responsibilities as citizens and being actively engaged in the political process. Because if we're not careful, we could lose the very things that make our democracy strong and resilient.
And that brings us to the end of another wild week in the world of news and politics.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, from national security slip-ups to economic turmoil to political intrigue and everything in between. As always, our goal was to cut through the noise, connect the dots, and give you the insights you need to make sense of it all.
It's been a roller coaster of a week, hasn't it? But it's important to remember that amidst all the chaos and uncertainty, there are lessons to be learned and questions to be asked. What does this week tell us about the state of our nation, about the challenges we face and the opportunities that lie ahead? And what role do we each play in shaping the future? All right, that's a wrap on this week's Political Pulse. Remember, we're bringing you 2 podcasts a week, this weekly recap plus a deep dive where we break down one major story with all the nuance and snark it deserves.
And when breaking news hits, you know we'll be dropping emergency episodes to keep you updated, because the news cycle never sleeps, and neither do we. Don't forget to subscribe and catch us next time for another round of political chaos.
Until then, stay informed and stay sane.
See you next time.
Bye, everyone.